You're listening to the RetireCoast podcast, where money, business, and lifestyle come together. Join us each week as we explore smarter financial planning, starting and growing businesses, and building the life you want at every stage, from millennials and Gen X to today's retirees. And now, here's your host, serial entrepreneur, author, and financial guide, Bill Anderson.
Welcome back to RetireCoast podcast. We're here today to talk about something extremely important. In fact, it may be one of the most important podcasts that I've ever done. And that is the Ultimate Mississippi Gulf Coast Fishing Guide. Of course, that's tongue-in-cheek, but if you're a fishing enthusiast, then it's a serious business for you. Maybe you have a little fun, have a beer once in a while, after you've gotten off your boat, of course. But fishing on the Mississippi Gulf Coast is kind of serious for people. It's a very, very popular thing to do here. Not sure you call it a sport. It's more of it's kind of a hobby or even a stronger interest than that for people. There are so many folks that I've run into here that have boats that I have joked about this in the past. I've gone into a restaurant when I first came to Mississippi years and years ago. I noticed that there were boats pretty much everywhere, and almost everybody I talked to had a boat. So I'd go to a restaurant, and, people are real friendly here, so you can talk to the folks in the next table. And I'd lean over when the conversation was right, and I'd say, hey, what kind of boat do you have? And the answer was, well, I've got this kind of boat or that kind of boat. I never asked them if they had a boat. I just assumed that they did. It was kind of the funny thing I was doing. And my answer was always, somebody at that table had a boat. If there was, more than one family there may have been more than one boat. But it was so funny. It was rarely a case. And then when I would speak to someone that didn't have a boat, they said, oh, my brother's got a boat, or my friend's got a boat. So everybody has access to a boat. And it's not just for boating. Actually, when I came from California, a lot of the boaters were using inboard outboards, a variety of different types of boats, but rarely did I see so many center console boats. Those are the serious fishing boats here. There's a fishing tank on the boat. If that's the kind of boat you've used, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you that are just listening because you're interested in the topic, then that center console boat is the most popular. It's not particularly well built for comfort. You can't really bring a big family there. Most of them have to sit around or sit on the edges. There are usually only one or two seats at the helm for whoever is driving the boat, and there isn't much else there in the boat except space to put fish. And they're large enough often to go out into deep water, blue water, off the coast. And, of course, they're used in the bayous and the rivers here as well. That's where a lot of smaller boats are used. Well, we're going to talk a lot about all this here in the Ultimate Mississippi Gulf Coast Fishing Guide. I'm going to provide a great deal of information on the different kinds of fish, both saltwater, freshwater, brackish water, the different kinds of places you can fish on the Gulf Coast, whether it's in a freshwater pond or a freshwater river, or the brackish part of a river, or in some of the bayous out in the inner Gulf, and then out in deep water where you can get the really big fish. And we're going to talk about the bait. We're going to talk about what people do with it, how they cook it. We're going to talk about the fishing regulations. Really, I haven't left anything out of this. It's extremely complete. Now, this is just our audio version of it. You can check out our article on RetireCoast.com, where we have a lot of visuals there and some other podcasts and videos, along with a great deal of information that you can, maybe use if you need to either find a boat, maybe find a place to rent a boat, find a deep-sea charter company to take you out. All of that is in the RetireCoast.com article. That'll be in the show notes here. So I'm going to present this to you as a dialogue. A couple of people are going to talk about this, and I think it's going to be an interesting back and forth. You know how it is. Maybe you might hear a fish story or two. And then please listen to it, and I'll catch you at the back end. Thank you.
Usually when we talk about a map,
there's this expectation of simplicity.
Right.
Like you look at a map of a coastline, for example, you see the brown land, you see that jagged black line, and then just a giant flat expanse of solid blue.
Yeah, it's just this big empty space.
Exactly. And the map essentially points and says, there it is. That's the ocean. Nothing to see here but water.
The problem with that map, though, is that it's just a massive oversimplification.
Oh, totally.
I mean, we are so conditioned to look at that flat blue expanse and just assume uniformity. But the moment you step off the land, you aren't stepping into a void.
Right.
You're actually stepping onto the roof of an incredibly complex, multi-layered, three-dimensional world. And it's a world that operates by an entirely different set of physical laws.
And today, we are ripping the roof off that world.
Yes, we are.
Specifically, we are looking at the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We're doing a deep dive into the ultimate Mississippi Gulf Coast fishing guide.
It's a great source.
It really is. But let me be clear right out of the gate here. The mission of this deep dive is not to just, hand you a list of tackle shops and tell you how to tie a knot.
No, not at all.
Even if you have never held a fishing rod in your life, even if the thought of touching a fish grosses you out, you really need to hear this.
Because what you're actually looking at through the lens of this guide is, well, it's a masterclass in behavioral ecology.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's this completely unvarnished look at how raw geography exerts extreme pressure on biology, and then how that biology, in turn, dictates the daily lives, the economy, and the culture of millions of humans.
We are going to take you from the quiet, muddy nurseries of the estuaries, where fish are dealing with the literal physics of cellular survival.
Right, the osmotic stress.
Yeah, we'll get into that. All the way out to the high stakes, adrenaline-fueled offshore runs in these crazy boats strapped with 1,000 horsepower engines.
It's quite a spectrum.
It really is. By the end of this deep dive, you are going to walk away with a fundamental understanding of how a drop of rain falling 100 miles inland eventually turns into a massive apex predator in the deep ocean.
It's all connected.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin with a geographical area this insanely complex?
Well, I think we begin with the concept of compression.
Compression.
Yeah. What makes the Mississippi Gulf Coast structurally unique is how it squeezes this astonishingly diverse set of environments into an incredibly short travel distance.
Oh, interesting.
In a lot of coastal regions, you might have to travel for hours or even days to transition from freshwater rivers to brackish bays to the deep ocean.
Right, it's very spread out.
Exactly. But here, they are violently stacked right on top of each other.
So it's all compressed.
Right. You have shallow, muddy marshes, protected bays, a string of barrier islands, and the deep open Gulf of Mexico compressed into a highly volatile gradient.
So before we can even look at the open ocean or those crazy offshore boats, we really have to look at the foundation of this whole system.
Yes, absolutely.
The guide points us straight into the mud and the grass, the estuaries.
The nurseries.
Right. We're talking about places like the Pascagoula River, Old Fort Bayou, and Biloxi Bay. And the Pascagoula River specifically is a massive focal point in the text.
And for good reason. The Pascagoula is arguably the heart of the entire system because it's one of the last major unimpeded river systems in the lower 48 states.
Wait, unimpeded meaning like humans haven't completely engineered it into submission with dams and concrete locks?
Precisely. It flows naturally.
That's rare.
It is incredibly rare. And think about what a dam actually does. It doesn't just hold back water.
What else is it holding back?
It holds back sediment, detritus, and biological matter. All the nutrients. Because the Pascagoula flows naturally, it basically acts as this uninterrupted conveyor belt. It's constantly delivering an incredible nutrient-rich payload of organic material and freshwater directly into the coastal bays.
And then what happens?
When that freshwater from the river collides and mixes with the salty tidal water pushing in from the Gulf of Mexico, it creates the estuary. The brackish water.
The brackish water. The guy calls this the Goldilocks zone.
Right, because it's
not too salty, not too fresh.
Exactly.
But I want to dig into the actual biology here because the guide introduces this concept of osmotic stress. And I'm not going to lie, this completely blew my mind.
It's a fascinating mechanism.
Because, when I hear the word stress, I think of sitting in gridlock traffic on a Tuesday.
Right, psychological stress.
Yeah, but for a microscopic juvenile fish, stress is a matter of cellular physics. Let's break down how this actually works.
Okay, let's apply this directly to you.
Okay, I'm ready.
Imagine eating an entire family-sized bag of incredibly salty potato chips without drinking any water.
Ugh, I'm thirsty just thinking about it.
Right. Your mouth dries out, you feel bloated. Your body is literally screaming for hydration because the salt is actively pulling moisture out of your cells.
Okay, yeah.
Now imagine being a tiny, newly hatched fish dropped into the high salinity water of the open Gulf of Mexico. The ocean is essentially that bag of salty chips.
Wait, so the water outside the fish's body has a much higher salt concentration than the fluids inside the fish's body.
Exactly. By the basic laws of osmosis, the ocean is relentlessly trying to suck the water out of the fish through its gills and skin.
So a fish surrounded by billions of gallons of water is in constant, immediate danger of dying from dehydration.
Yes.
That is a wild paradox.
It really is a brutal existence. To survive, that tiny fish has to expend massive amounts of biological energy, what biologists call ATP, just to actively pump salt out of its gills and process water.
So it's constantly working just to stay hydrated.
Exactly. It's like running a bilge pump on a sinking boat 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
It takes a huge percentage of their daily caloric intake. Now, take that same tiny fish and drift it into the brackish water of the Pascagoula River estuary.
Where the salinity drops.
The salinity drops drastically. The water outside the fish suddenly matches the internal chemistry of the fish itself.
So the osmotic pressure vanishes.
Exactly. That biological bilge pump can finally shut down.
And when a juvenile fish suddenly has, 20 or 30% of its daily energy freed up, what does it do with it?
It redirects every single bit of that surplus energy into rapid cellular division. It grows.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the reduced osmotic stress is a biological cheat code. They develop muscle mass and bone density at an exponential rate compared to fish stuck in the high salinity open ocean.
And they are doing this rapid growth in an environment that is basically a 247 all-you-can-eat buffet.
Right, the food is everywhere.
The plankton from the river feeds the grass shrimp, the shrimp feed the finger mullet, and the mullet feed these rapidly growing juvenile sport fish.
It's a perfect system.
But here's the catch. You can be the fastest growing fish in the world, eating all the shrimp you want, but none of that matters if a 10-foot bull shark swims by and swallows you whole.
No, it certainly does not.
So the estuary has to provide a second, equally important function, physical protection.
Yes. And the structural geometry of the marsh is just as important as the water chemistry.
The geometry?
Yeah. We are talking about vast expanses of black needle rush and smooth cordgrass.
Okay.
These aren't just weeds. Their root systems and dense, rigid stalks create a highly complex, tightly woven matrix in water that might only be 6 to 12 inches deep.
So I'm picturing it like trying to drive an 18-wheeler through a dense bamboo forest.
That's a perfect analogy.
Like the bouncers of this club are literally the physics of turning radius and water displacement.
Exactly. A tiny 3-inch juvenile redfish can dart in and out of those grass stalks with perfect agility.
Right.
But a massive adult shark or an aggressive Jack Crevalle, the bullies of the ocean, they physically lack the turning radius and the clearance to get into the grass.
If they try, they just strand themselves in the mud.
Right. So the small fish feed in total impenetrable safety.
And the success rate of this biological fortress is staggering. I mean, the guide says marine biologists estimate up to 90% of all commercial and recreational fish species in the Gulf of Mexico spend at least part of their lives developing in these coastal estuaries.
Up to 90%.
Wait, 90%. Let's just pause on that number for a second because that changes the entire framing of this deep dive.
It really does.
If 90% of the fish rely on these muddy bays, then the entire economy of the Gulf of America, the multi-million-dollar charter boats, the massive commercial shrimping fleets, the waterfront restaurants.
Everything.
Every single dime of that industry is tethered to the health of some unassuming, muddy marsh grass.
Without the estuaries acting as the incubator, the entire offshore fishery simply ceases to exist. The food web collapses from the bottom up.
That is wild. But that creates a biological bottleneck, right? Because a juvenile redfish growing at an exponential rate in the safety of the marsh grass isn't going to stay 3 inches long forever.
No, they grow fast.
So eventually it hits a wall.
That's the built-in limitation of the nursery. The estuary is perfect for a small fish. But when that redfish reaches 20 or 30 inches and suddenly needs thousands of calories a day to sustain its mass, a few grass shrimp just aren't going to cut it.
Right, it needs bigger meals.
And furthermore, its body size makes it impossible to navigate the dense shallows. It's essentially pushed out by its own metabolic demands. it has to leave the nursery.
Which brings us into the broader Mississippi Sound, the inshore waters. The fish have graduated, basically.
Yes, they've moved into the real world.
And this is where we meet the daily bread and butter of Gulf Coast fishing. The guide introduces us to the big three inshore species.
The big three, right.
And what I find fascinating is that these three fish share the exact same water, but they have evolved completely distinct, almost conflicting methods of survival and hunting.
You're looking at three entirely different evolutionary answers to the exact same environment. You have the red drum, the spotted sea trout, and the flounder.
Okay, let's look at the red drum first, which is universally known as the redfish.
Right.
Bronze red coloration, very distinct black spot on the tail. But the guide spends almost no time talking about how they look, and all its time talking about their mechanics. They are built for torque.
Pure torque.
There is a quote from a local fisherman in the source text. It says, "You never really forget your first big redfish. You think you're hung on the bottom until the bottom suddenly starts moving."
That's very accurate. Redfish are essentially the diesel trucks of the inshore waters.
Diesel trucks.
Yeah. They are not built for sustained, lightning-fast sprints. If you look at their anatomy, they have broad, powerful shoulders and a massive, squared-off tail fin.
So they aren't winning any races.
No. That tail is designed for raw, heavy, sustained pulling power. They use that torque to literally root their faces into the mud and oyster shells to crush crabs. When an angler hooks a large adult, what locals call a bull red, it becomes a test of equipment failure. They will strip drag off a reel through pure, unadulterated brute force.
Okay, so that's the diesel truck. Now contrast that with the spotted sea trout or speckled trout.
Very different fish.
Silver bodies, black spots. The guide paints a picture of trout fishing that sounds less like a bar brawl and more like a highly calculated surgical strike.
It is very technical.
Like you can't just drop a piece of bait to the bottom and wait. You have to monitor tides, water clarity, bird activity. Why are trout so much more demanding?
Because speckled trout are highly attuned visual and acoustic hunters. They don't root in the mud like redfish do.
Where are they?
They suspend in the water column. And they rely on their highly sensitive lateral lines to detect the vibration of moving bait fish. They are basically waiting to ambush prey that gets swept along by the tidal currents.
And this leads to a mechanical quirk that the guide highlights, which dictates the primary way people catch them. Trout have incredibly fragile jaw structures. The locals actually call them paper mouths.
That's right.
Because they don't crush hard crab shells, they don't need a heavy bone structure. They just inhale soft shrimp and minnows.
Exactly.
So this fragile mouth led to the invention of a uniquely Gulf Coast tactic called the popping cork. Let's walk through the physics of this, because I thought this was brilliant.
The popping cork is an acoustic lure. It's a brightly colored float positioned above the bait, but the top of the cork is deeply concave, like a shallow bowl.
Okay.
When the angler sharply jerks the rod, the cork is pulled violently through the surface of the water. The concave top traps a pocket of air and drags it underwater, which creates a brief, localized vacuum.
And then what?
When that vacuum collapses, it produces a loud, resonant bloop sound.
And to a speckled trout, that specific frequency sounds exactly like another predatory fish snapping its jaws on a shrimp at the surface.
It triggers a competitive feeding instinct.
It rings the dinner bell.
Exactly. The trout hears the pop, rushes over to steal the food, and instead finds the angler's bait suspended underneath the cork.
But wait, here is where I see a massive mechanical contradiction in the guide.
Oh.
If you just told me that speckled trout have paper-thin mouths that tear easily, isn't telling an angler to aggressively and violently jerk a rod to pop a cork a recipe for ripping the hook right out of the fish's face the second it bites?
You've just identified the central learning curve of trout fishing.
Ah.
It requires a completely schizophrenic approach to rod mechanics.
Right.
You have to use sharp, aggressive, violent motions to work the cork and draw the fish in.
Right.
But the microsecond that cork plunges underwater, indicating a bite, your brain has to instantly switch modes. If you set the hook with the same violence you used to pop the cork, you will physically tear the hook straight through that fragile jaw tissue.
Ouch.
Yeah. You have to transition instantly from aggressive jerking to a smooth, steady, sweeping pressure. It requires immense finesse.
So a brawler and a surgeon?
Basically.
And then we have the third of the big three, which took a completely different evolutionary path. The flounder.
The flounder is fascinating.
The flounder essentially said, I'm not going to outmuscle you, and I'm not going to outswim you. I'm simply going to disappear.
Right. The flounder is an ambush predator, engineered for absolute patience. As they develop, one of their eyes literally migrates across their skull, so both eyes are on the same side of their head.
This is so bizarre.
It really is. They lie perfectly flat on the sandy or muddy bottom. They have chromatophores in their skin that allow them to change color and pattern to perfectly match the substrate beneath them.
They bury themselves in the sand with just their eyes protruding.
And they wait. They don't actively cruise for food. They find a high-traffic area, like the mouth of a marsh drain, where the falling tide is funneling shrimp out into the bay, and they become a literal landmine.
Landmine.
When a bait fish drifts overhead, they use a massive burst of white muscle fiber to explode upward, engulf the prey, and settle back into the sand in a fraction of a second.
Which means the human trying to catch them has to match that patience.
Absolutely.
The guide notes that you have to slowly, methodically drag your bait literally across the bottom, an inch at a time, hoping to drag it directly over a buried flounder.
It's very slow fishing.
But because of this shallow water, bottom-dwelling behavior, the guide brings up an ancient, alternative way to hunt them. Flounder gigging.
Ah, yes. Gigging strips away the rod and reel entirely.
Tell me about it.
At night, flounder move into extremely shallow water, sometimes just ankle deep. Gulf Coast locals use specialized shallow draft boats equipped with incredibly bright underwater LED lights, or they just wade on foot.
Oh, wow. They just walk.
Yeah. They slowly move along the shoreline, using the light to scan the sand for the faint camouflaged outline of a flounder, often just the shape of its eyes or the ridge of its mouth.
It's like finding a needle in a haystack.
It really takes a trained eye. When they spot one, they use a multi-pronged spear called a gig to harvest it. It's entirely visual, completely silent, and deeply traditional.
So we've covered the big three, but the Mississippi Sound has an expansive cast of supporting characters. I was reading the guide's notes on some of these other fish, and I honestly couldn't believe what I was looking at.
Which ones stood out?
Let's talk about the sheep's head. I'm looking at a picture of this fish, and it has bold, vertical black and white stripes like a cartoon prisoner.
Right.
But the teeth are pure nightmare fuel. Why does a fish have teeth that look identically like a set of human dentures?
It is unsettling to look at, I agree. But it's a perfect example of hyper-specialized adaptation. Sheep's head do not hunt free-swimming shrimp or agile bait fish.
What do they eat then?
They are benthic grazers. Their entire world is vertical structure. Concrete bridge pilings, seawalls, and jagged oyster reefs. They feed on the organisms that grow on that hard structure, barnacles, small crabs, oysters.
So they need serious dental work for that.
Exactly. Those human-like incisors and heavy flat molars in the back of their throat are designed to crush literal concrete and heavy calcium carbonate shells.
And catching them sounds infuriating. The local joke in the text is, if you actually feel the bite, you're already too late.
Because they aren't striking a bait and swimming away, which would pull your line tight.
They're too sneaky for that.
Very. They hover completely stationary next to a piling, use those delicate front incisors to surgically pluck the bait off the hook, crush it in their molars, and spit out the hook, all without ever moving.
Oh, man.
You don't feel a tug. You just notice your line twitching slightly sideways. It requires absolute intense focus.
You're trying to outsmart a pickpocket with dentures.
That's a great way to put it.
And then the guide mentions a fish that anglers actively despise, the gaff-topsail catfish.
Oh, yes, the sail cat.
The text says people hate catching them because they are covered in a suffocating layer of thick, heavy slime, and their dorsal fins have sharp, venomous spines.
They are certainly not a favorite.
Like, if you get punctured by one, the venom causes agonizing, throbbing pain for hours. So why do they thrive if they are so awful?
Because that slime and venom make them nearly invincible. The slime coat is a highly effective immune defense against parasites and bacteria, and it drastically reduces drag in the water.
And the spines.
The venomous spines deter larger predators like dolphins and sharks. And on top of that, they are highly euryhaline.
Euryhaline.
It means they can tolerate massive fluctuations in salt levels. They can survive out by the salty barrier islands. And they can survive miles up the freshwater rivers. They are ultimate survivors, even if anglers consider them a nuisance.
Okay, so we've seen how these inshore fish operate during the day, but the guide details one specific tactic that creates an artificial ecosystem entirely dependent on human infrastructure.
Night fishing.
Yes. Night fishing under bridge and dock lights. You go out into the bayou at midnight and you see these glowing green or white lights submerged in the water near residential docks.
The guide says this is a guaranteed way to catch fish.
It is incredibly effective.
What is the biological chain reaction happening when someone flips that light switch?
It's called forced phototaxis. When you submerge a bright light in dark water, microscopic zooplankton and phytoplankton are drawn to the light source. It's an involuntary biological response.
So they just flock to it.
Within minutes, the water around the light is swarming with millions of microscopic organisms.
The first link in the food chain.
Exactly. And that dense swarm of plankton immediately attracts the secondary consumers: glass minnows, small mullet, and grass shrimp.
So the bait arrives.
So now you have a massive, chaotic bait ball swirling in a 10-foot illuminated circle. And where there's a dense concentration of bait, the apex predators arrive. The speckled trout and the redfish push into the area.
But the guide specifies a very crucial tactic here. You don't cast your bait right into the center of the light. You cast into the shadows. Why?
Because the predators are using the contrast to their advantage. A large speckled trout doesn't want to sit in the bright light where it's exposed.
Right.
It circles just outside the edge of the illumination, hiding in the pitch-black shadow. It watches the silhouette of the bait fish passing through the light and darts in to strike, immediately retreating back into the dark.
Oh, that makes sense.
If you cast directly into the light, the predators ignore it. You have to cast into the transition zone, the shadow line. It is a completely self-contained, high-intensity ecosystem manufactured entirely by a light bulb.
But as dynamic as this inshore world is, as complex as the popping corks and the dock lights are, the guide makes a very stark pivot.
A very big pivot.
It says that to understand the true scale of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, you have to leave the protection of the sound. You have to push past the barrier islands.
Barrier islands,
Yeah.
Ship Island, Horn Island, Cat Island, and Petit Bois are the Great Dividing Line.
Huh.
Geologically, they are a string of sandbars migrating slowly westward over centuries.
Okay.
But ecologically, they are the physical shield that absorbs the violent wave energy of the open Gulf of Mexico, creating the calm bathtub of the Mississippi Sound.
But once you navigate your boat through the narrow passes between those islands, the training wheels really come off.
They absolutely do.
The geography changes from a protected bay to the endless horizon of the open ocean. And the vessels required to survive out here change completely.
You need a serious boat.
We are no longer talking about the quiet little skiffs used in the marshes. The guide introduces the undisputed kings of the coast, the center console offshore boat.
The center console design is just a brilliant piece of utilitarian engineering.
How so?
Well, the entire steering column, electronics, and controls are isolated in the absolute center of the deck. This allows an angler to walk 360 degrees around the perimeter of the boat without ever passing a rod over an obstacle.
Oh, I see.
When you are fighting a 100-pound fish that decides to run under the boat, that mobility is the difference between landing the choice and snapping the rod.
I mean, I understand the deck layout, but I need to challenge the propulsion aspect of these vessels because I'm reading the specs in the text, and it describes these boats hanging twin, triple, or even 4 massive outboard engines off the back, generating well over 1,000 horsepower.
It's a lot of power.
Let's be honest, 1,000 horsepower on a 30-foot boat sounds like an ego trip. Isn't that just a massive waste of fuel and a way to show off at the marina? Why do you need the horsepower of a Bugatti to go catch a fish?
I completely understand why it looks like pure excess to an outsider. But in the deep Gulf, excessive horsepower is actually a vital safety mechanism.
Safety, really?
Yes. When these boats leave the barrier islands, they aren't just going a mile offshore. They are targeting oil rigs and deep water reefs that sit 50, 75, even 100 miles out in the open ocean.
So it's about covering distance quickly.
It's about outrunning the environment. The Gulf of Mexico is notorious for its rapidly deteriorating weather.
The pop-up storms.
Exactly. A glassy, calm morning can spawn a violent squall line with 40-mile-per-hour winds and 6-foot swells in under an hour. If you are 80 miles offshore in a slow boat when that weather hits, you are in a life-threatening survival situation.
Wow, okay.
Having 1,000 horsepower isn't about top speed on a calm day. It's about the ability to generate enough thrust to get the boat on plane, riding on top of the waves rather than plowing through them, even when the boat is loaded with thousands of pounds of fuel, ice, and gear while navigating through deep troughs.
So it's an escape pod.
It gives the captain the speed to literally outrun a thunderstorm and get the crew back to port safely.
Okay, that completely reframes it for me. It's a survival tool. So these massive vessels blast 100 miles out into the deep blue water. But the open ocean isn't a magical fishbowl where life is evenly distributed, right?
No, not at all.
The bottom of the Gulf of Mexico is, for the most part, a flat, barren, featureless desert of sand and mud. Fish don't just wander aimlessly through a desert, they need an oasis.
And in the offshore environment, an oasis is defined entirely by vertical structure. Life requires a foothold.
And this is where human intervention comes in.
Yes, it has profoundly altered the ecology of the Gulf in a way that is actually incredibly beneficial. The text details how the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources has invested heavily in artificial reef programs.
Artificial reefs? Like what?
They are taking concrete pipes, massive steel rubble from demolished bridges, and purpose-built concrete pyramids, and literally sinking them in designated zones in the middle of this underwater desert.
And the biological timeline of what happens next is fascinating. You drop a concrete pipe onto the sand. Within hours, it alters the localized water currents, creating small eddies.
Yes.
Within weeks, microscopic marine algae and barnacles attach to the rough surface of the concrete.
That biofouling provides a food source for tiny reef fish and crustaceans. They take up residence in the crevices of the concrete to hide from currents and predators.
So the bait shows up.
Now you have a concentrated bait source. That bait attracts medium-sized predators. And suddenly, this single piece of bridge rubble has become an isolated, multi-level underwater city.
That's incredible.
It draws pelagic, migratory apex predators miles closer to the coast, because there is now a reliable feeding station where previously there was nothing but sand.
And the undisputed king of these underwater cities, according to the guide, is the red snapper.
Oh, the red snapper.
The text treats the red snapper with this wild mix of reverence and frustration. They are the economic engine of the offshore charter industry. They are massive, aggressive, bright red fish that school tightly around these artificial reefs.
They're prized for their table fare, which makes them highly sought after. But they're also the center of the most complex, politically charged fisheries management plans in the country.
Right.
Because they're so heavily targeted, the regulatory seasons dictate that anglers only have a few days or weeks out of the entire year to harvest them. So when snapper season opens in the summer, it triggers a massive armada of boats pushing offshore all at once.
But the snapper isn't the only heavyweight down there. The guide brings up the grouper.
The grouper, yes.
And the mechanics of fighting a grouper sound less like a sport and more like an industrial accident waiting to happen.
It's intense.
Groupers are benthic. They live entirely on the bottom. When they take a bait, their immediate instinctual response is to violently spin around and dive back into the deepest, sharpest cavern of the concrete reef they can find.
Which fundamentally changes the tackle required.
Hmm.
You cannot use a lightweight rod for a grouper.
What do you use?
You are using incredibly stiff, heavy tackle with braided line that has no stretch. The second you feel the bite, you have to lock down the reel and pull upward with maximum physical force.
Just ripping them up.
You aren't just fighting the weight of the fish, you are fighting its fast-twitch muscle fibers that are designed for an explosive burst back into its fortress.
It's a literal tug of war with a submarine that is actively trying to close its garage door.
That is exactly what it feels like.
If they manage to wedge themselves inside the concrete pipe, the line drags across sharp barnacles, snaps, and the fish wins. You have a 2-second window to halt their momentum.
And while that brutal tug of war is happening on the bottom, there is an entirely different class of fish operating in the upper water column. The pelagics.
The nomads of the open sky of the ocean. The guide lists the cobia, the king mackerel, the wahoo, and the yellowfin tuna.
The speedsters.
These fish never touch the bottom. They require completely different tactics, right?
They require speed and coverage. You aren't dropping a bait down to a stationary concrete block. You are trolling. Dragging specialized lures behind the boat at high speeds for miles, looking for temperature breaks, distinct rips where different water currents collide, or floating patches of sargassum weed. These fish are highly migratory, following massive schools of bait fish across the entire Gulf basin.
This brings up a major tension in the guide that I really want to pull apart. I am reading about these $1 million center console boats equipped with radar arrays, side-standing sonar that can paint a 3D image of the ocean floor, and satellite weather uplinks. They look like military command centers.
The tech is unbelievable.
But in the same chapter, the text talks about local captains relying on little black books, secret, closely guarded, handwritten GPS coordinates passed down from their grandfathers.
Right.
Wait a minute. If you have a radar that can see a fish from 300 feet away, why on earth do you care about your grandfather's secret coordinate? Can't the technology just find the fish?
That is the ultimate paradox of modern fishing. The technology is miraculous, but it has a massive limitation.
Which is?
Its field of view. A side-scan sonar can absolutely paint a stunning 3D picture of a shipwreck in 300 feet of water, showing you exactly where the snapper is suspended. But the ocean is vast beyond comprehension.
Right.
If you are driving your boat over empty sand, your $50,000 screen will just show you $50,000 worth of empty sand.
The radar only works if you're already in the right neighborhood.
Exactly. The technology helps you see what is directly underneath the hull once you arrive. But the secret GPS coordinates the generational knowledge of exactly where to drive that boat in a grid of 10,000 square miles of identical-looking blue water that is the invaluable human element.
Wow.
A seasoned captain knows that a specific pile of rocks that holds massive grouper is located at one specific latitude and longitude. The satellite tech helps him anchor perfectly on top of it, but the analog knowledge of the grandfather is what guided the spaceship to the oasis.
Technology confirms what tradition already suspects.
Beautifully said.
But all of that technology, all of those secret numbers, and all of that horsepower are completely rendered useless if you don't understand the underlying physical laws that govern the coast.
Mother Nature always wins.
We've covered the where and the what, but the guide makes it abundantly clear that in the Gulf of Mexico, the when dictates absolutely everything. And this brings us to the clockwork of the coast.
Time functions very differently on the water. It is not driven by a mechanical watch on your wrist. It is driven by celestial mechanics. Specifically, the gravitational pull of the moon, the tides.
The guide states repeatedly that fishermen here care far more about the movement of water than the actual time of day.
Absolutely true.
You could be fishing at noon or 4 a.m., but if the tide isn't right, you might as well be fishing in a swimming pool. Let's break down the physics of why moving water equals feeding fish.
Think back to the bouncers in the estuary. In a static, slack tide environment where the water is perfectly still, the system is dormant.
Everything is just resting.
A shrimp can safely hide in the needle rush. A bait fish can hover near a bridge piling without expending much energy. The predators know this. They conserve their energy because chasing down comfortable, rested prey is inefficient.
But then the moon does its job.
The moon's gravity pulls billions of gallons of water from the deep Gulf into the shallow Mississippi Sound, or sucks it back out. This creates massive, forceful currents.
And that changes everything.
It turns the entire ecosystem into a chaotic conveyor belt. That rushing water forcefully flushes the shrimp out of the protective grass. It creates turbulent eddies that disorient the bait fish, sweeping them helplessly past the bridge pilings.
The buffet line gets turned on.
Predators lock into this cycle. They position themselves down current of these structural bottlenecks and let the tidal conveyor belt deliver the food directly to their mouths.
So smart.
If the tide isn't moving, the conveyor belt is off, and the fish simply will not eat.
So the daily clock is the tide. But the macro clock is the seasons.
The seasons dictate the migrations.
The guide walks us through the year, and it describes a massive coast-wide biological factory that shifts production based on temperature. Spring is the awakening.
Right.
The warming waters accelerate metabolism, triggering explosive baitfish growth and drawing in those migratory cobia from the south. Summer brings the peak offshore snapper runs, but the text notes a drastic change for the inshore marshes. The heat becomes an oppressive physical barrier.
We are talking about water temperatures in the shallow bays pushing into the upper 80s or low 90s.
That's bathwater.
It is. And warm water holds significantly less dissolved oxygen than cold water. So not only is the water physically hot, it is chemically suffocating.
So the fish evacuate.
Just like humans retreat indoors to air conditioning, the speckled trout and redfish abandon the shallow grass flats, which are basically baking in the sun, and retreat to deeper, cooler channels where the oxygen levels are higher.
So daytime fishing just dies.
This completely shuts down the daytime inshore bite. forcing anglers to adapt by fishing at night or just before dawn.
But then the text shifts to fall, and it speaks about fall with this almost religious reverence.
Ooh, fall is legendary.
The first cold fronts push down from Canada, the humidity drops, and the water temperatures begin to plummet.
Fall is the biological trigger of panic. The dropping temperature and the shortening photoperiods, the amount of daylight signal to the entire marine ecosystem that winter is approaching.
They know it's coming.
For cold-blooded animals, winter means a drastic slowing of their metabolism. They know instinctually that they must build massive fat reserves immediately to survive the lean months. It triggers a coast-wide, gluttonous feeding frenzy.
And it also triggers the migrations. Remember those camouflage flounder that spent the entire summer buried in the mud inside the bay?
Yes.
The cold fronts act as a starter pistol. They all pull up stakes simultaneously and begin marching offshore toward the deeper Gulf waters to spawn.
And they must exit through the narrow passes between the barrier islands. It creates a massive, predictable bottleneck.
Just a highway of flounder.
At the exact same time, the bull reds, the giant adult redfish, gather in huge aggressive schools near those same passes to perform their own spawning rituals. The concentration of biomass in October and November is staggering.
Finally, winter arrives. Things slow down. The fair weather anglers pack up their gear. But the guide notes that this is the perfect time to target our old creepy-toothed friend, the sheep's head.
The dentist's nightmare.
Right. Why? Because they are structure-bound. They don't migrate 100 miles south. They just hunker down deeper on the bridge pilings. If you can handle the freezing wind, you know exactly where they are.
You're not searching for fish. You're just extracting them from known stationary deepwater architecture.
But speaking of handling the freezing wind, we have to talk about the physical dangers of this environment because this massive biological factory is operating in a setting that can and will try to actively kill you.
It is not a forgiving place.
The guide does not sugarcoat this. Let's start with summer thunderstorms. In many places, a summer rainstorm is an inconvenience. On the Gulf Coast, it is a localized terror event.
The meteorological mechanics of the Gulf Coast summer are uniquely volatile. You have massive amounts of extreme heat baking the shallow water, creating immense rising columns of humid air.
Just a pressure cooker.
This convective energy can spawn localized thunderstorms that do not appear on a morning radar forecast.
A morning that is perfectly calm and glassy can turn into a life-threatening squall line in 45 minutes. And the text points out, the most immediate danger isn't necessarily the wind or the waves, it's the lightning.
Think about the physics of this situation. You're out on the open water, the ocean is perfectly flat.
Yeah.
You are sitting in a metal or fiberglass boat, literally holding a 9-foot graphite rod, which is a highly conductive material pointing straight up at a massive, electrically charged cumulonimbus cloud.
You're asking for it.
You have made yourself the tallest, most conductive object in a 2-mile radius. You are a literal lightning rod.
Which goes back to the 1,000 horsepower engines. You cannot outmuscle a Gulf thunderstorm. You have to monitor the horizon constantly, read the cloud formations, and use your speed to evacuate before the anvil cloud spreads over you.
The sky is dangerous, but the dangers underneath the water are equally persistent.
Let's talk about the stingray shuffle. I read this section of the guide and initially thought it was a joke about a terrible local dance move.
And I get that a lot.
But it is a vital, non-negotiable survival tactic for wade fishermen.
It is entirely practical kinematics. The shallow, sandy flats, where anglers prefer to wade out on foot to cast for speckled trout, happen to be the exact same biological niche preferred by southern stingrays.
And the rays bury themselves in the sand to rest.
Right.
And if you are walking normally, taking plunging steps through the water, and you plant your foot squarely on the back of a buried stingray, you trigger an instantaneous, violent defensive reflex.
The ray whips its powerful tail upward and forward, driving a rigid, serrated, venom-sheathed barb deep into your calf or ankle.
Oh my God.
The physical trauma of the serrated edge pulling back out of the tissue is horrific, but the venom itself causes agonizing localized tissue necrosis.
So the shuffle, how does changing your walking stride prevent this?
Instead of lifting your feet and plunging them downward, you slide your boots continuously along the sandy bottom. You shuffle. By pushing your foot forward through the sand, 2 things happen. First, you are sending acoustic vibrations forward through the substrate, alerting the ray to your presence.
Giving them a heads up.
Second, the toe of your boot gently nudges the edge of the ray's wing before your weight comes down on its back. The ray realizes a large creature is approaching and simply scurries away. It's a physical communication system to avoid conflict.
Geography dictates behavior once again. But zooming out from localized dangers like lightning and stingrays, the guide touches on the ultimate macro-level force of nature on the Gulf Coast, hurricane season.
Hurricanes are the ultimate ecological reset button. We talked earlier about the map not being static.
Right.
A major Category 4 storm surge literally redraws the physical geography of the coast overnight.
The storm surge can destroy massive chunks of the barrier islands, carve completely new deep water passes through the sandbars, and dump billions of gallons of freshwater rain, which drastically alters the salinity profile of the estuaries we talked about earlier.
It's a complete upheaval.
A captain might have relied on a specific oyster reef in July, and after a hurricane in September, that reef is buried under 3 feet of new mud.
The structural map is wiped clean. But there is a fascinating biological phenomenon associated with hurricanes that the text briefly touches on.
Yes. The guide notes that the days immediately preceding a hurricane striking the coast often feature the most explosive, aggressive fishing of the entire year. It asks if the extreme pressure drops actually trigger a feeding frenzy. Do the fish actually know a hurricane is coming?
Well, they don't conceptualize a hurricane, but they absolutely feel its physical approach through their internal anatomy.
Wow.
Fish are incredibly attuned to barometric pressure. Many species possess a swim bladder, an internal gas-filled organ that they use to maintain neutral buoyancy in the water column.
Like a biological buoyancy compensator on a scuba diver.
Exactly. But that swim bladder is highly sensitive to the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on the water. According to Boyle's law, as external pressure decreases, the volume of a gas expands.
Okay.
When a massive low-pressure system, like a hurricane, begins to approach the coast, the atmospheric pressure drops rapidly. The gas inside the fish's swim bladder physically expands.
That has to be physically uncomfortable.
It causes immense physical discomfort and alters their buoyancy. This internal physical change acts as a massive biological alarm bell. Their instinct dictates that severe, turbulent, unfishable conditions are imminent.
They know it's going to get bad.
They know their ability to hunt will be completely suspended for days or weeks due to muddy water and violent currents.
So they panic.
It is the biological equivalent of humans panic buying bread and milk at the grocery store before a blizzard. The fish abandon all caution and gorge themselves aggressively on any available calorie to weather the coming storm. The bite becomes phenomenal right before the weather collapses.
Nature's early warning system. We've spent an hour talking about how the geography, the salinity, the tides, and the weather shape the biology of the fish.
It's quite a list.
But humans are part of this ecosystem too. We have to adapt to these exact same environmental pressures. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most culturally defining section of our deep dive.
The culture.
We need to look at how the people live, dress, and eat to survive and thrive in this crucible. The guide spends a significant amount of time detailing what it calls the uniform of the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
Because you cannot separate the people from the environment. If you want to spend 8 hours a day on the water in July, the environment demands a specific functional response.
You walk down to a marina in Pass Christian or Biloxi on a Saturday morning, and everyone looks remarkably similar. Let's break down the components of this uniform. First, the footwear. The guide is incredibly specific. Boat shoes. But more importantly, no socks. Never, under any circumstances, socks.
It is pure practicality. The deck of a boat is a constantly wet environment salt spray, wash-down hoses, live wells splashing.
Wet socks are the worst.
Cotton socks would immediately soak up the salt water and trap it against your skin, leading to blisters and fungal issues. Boat shoes are engineered with specialized rubber soles with a razor cut sipping to grip wet fiberglass, and they're designed to drain water and dry rapidly against bare skin.
Next component. Polarized sunglasses. Now, I understand wearing sunglasses to look cool or dim the bright light, but the guide insists these are mandatory fishing equipment. Why specifically polarized?
Because standard sunglasses just darken the entire world.
Yeah.
They don't solve the core optical problem of the ocean, glare.
Right.
Sunlight is unpolarized. Its light waves scatter in all directions. But when sunlight hits a flat, reflective surface like the ocean, the reflected light becomes polarized. The light waves align horizontally, creating an intense, blinding white glare that acts like an opaque mirror on the surface of the water.
You can't see the fish below the surface.
You can't see anything. Polarized lenses contain a specialized chemical film with molecules aligned vertically. This vertical microscopic fencing physically blocks the horizontally polarized light waves reflecting off the water.
It cuts right through it.
It strips away the blinding mirror effect entirely. allowing your eyes to penetrate the surface layer and read the water clarity, spot submerged oyster reefs, and actually see the bait fish swimming beneath the surface. It is a massive tactical advantage.
But the guide includes a stark, almost comedic warning about these expensive sunglasses. They must have retaining straps around your neck, because the Gulf has claimed thousands of pairs.
Oh, millions probably.
I love this visual. I am just picturing the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico as a giant, insatiable, lost and found bin filled with $300 Costas.
It's the inevitable reality of the environment. Between 50-mile-per-hour boat rides, sudden gusts of wind, and the sheer physical chaos of leaning over the gunwale to haul a thrashing 40-pound redfish into the boat, if your glasses aren't tethered to your skull, they are going overboard.
It's an expensive mistake.
Every local has a story of watching a paycheck slowly sink into the green abyss.
But the most counterintuitive part of the uniform, the part that defies logic to an outsider, is the long-sleeve debate.
Oh, this confuses everyone.
We have established that the Mississippi Gulf Coast summer features sweltering 100-degree heat combined with 90% humidity, and yet the hardcore local anglers at the boat ramp are wearing long-sleeve shirts with hoods, heavy neck gaiters pulled up over their noses, and gloves.
Fully covered.
They look like they are dressed for an expedition to the Arctic. Why on earth would you cover every single inch of your skin in a sauna?
It looks crazy, but it is actually highly advanced thermodynamics. It is entirely about managing solar radiation.
How does that work?
The direct, intense UV sunlight beating down from the sky, combined with the secondary UV radiation reflecting upward off the surface of the water, creates an incredibly hostile thermal environment. If you wear shorts and a t-shirt, your skin is absorbing massive amounts of heat, accelerating dehydration, and risking severe sunburns.
So the clothing is actually a thermal shield.
Precisely. These modern performance fabrics are incredibly thin, lightweight, and engineered with UPF sun protection. They physically block the UV rays from penetrating.
Okay, but isn't it still hot?
Here's the trick. They are moisture wicking. When you sweat, the fabric pulls the moisture away from your skin and spreads it across the surface of the shirt. As the boat moves or the sea breeze blows, that moisture evaporates rapidly, creating a localized air conditioning effect.
Evaporative cooling.
The physics of evaporative cooling means you are objectively, measurably cooler and significantly safer from heat stroke, completely covered in these fabrics, than you would be exposed to the sun in a t-shirt.
Desert survival logic applied to the ocean.
Exactly.
And all of this specialized gear leads to what the text affectionately calls the boat ramp fashion show. Locals take their branding and their functionality incredibly seriously. But it's not just about looking the part, it's about executing the cultural rituals of the coast. And one of the most prominent, physically demanding rituals the guide describes is the art of catching bait, specifically throwing a cast net.
Yes, the text rightfully calls it a cultural rite of passage.
Because you aren't just going to a sterile big box store and buying a plastic tub of frozen bait. To catch the biggest fish, you need live bait from the estuary, and that requires a cast net.
A heavy, heavy cast net.
A cast net is a heavy, circular web of monofilament line with heavy lead weights spaced every few inches around the entire perimeter. The guide describes anglers standing on the bow of a boat, twisting their bodies and throwing this heavy bundle of mesh so it miraculously opens up into a perfect 10-foot circle in midair before landing completely flat on the water to trap a school of live pogies.
It is an intricate application of physics and centrifugal force. A large cast net might have 1.5 pounds of lead weight per foot of radius. It is heavy, cumbersome, and incredibly frustrating to learn.
So many moving parts.
You have to coil the rope precisely, drape a specific section of the lead line over your shoulder, and hold another section of the lead line in your teeth, though dentists aggressively advise against that part.
I can imagine. And then the throw itself is a full-body movement.
It originates in the core. You don't throw it with your arms. You use the rotational torque of your hips and torso to swing the heavy lead weights outward.
Right.
If done correctly, the centrifugal force pulls the mesh outward in all directions simultaneously, opening it into a massive parachute before it hits the water. It is a physical skill that takes years to master, and it is a generational transfer of knowledge.
From grandfather to grandson.
You will routinely see grandfathers patiently teaching 7-year-olds the mechanics of the throw right there on the concrete boat ramp.
And why do they endure all of this? The osmotic stress, the 1,000 horsepower weather escapes, the stingray shuffles, the blistering heat? Because of the end goal.
The payoff.
The ultimate culmination of the entire Mississippi Gulf Coast experience, the culinary culture. The guide calls it hook to table. This is where the entire interconnected ecosystem we've been talking about ends up on a plate. Let's talk about the fish fry.
The fish fry is the defining social glue of the coast. It is the reward for mastering the environment. You navigate the tides, you catch a mess of ground mullet or speckled trout, you bring them back to the dock, and the filleting process begins immediately.
The text sets the scene so vividly. It isn't a formal, pretentious dinner. It is a gathering around a deep fryer under a corrugated tin roof. You have freshly caught fillets tossed in seasoned cornmeal breading, dropped into a vat of 350-degree peanut oil.
Delicious.
The Maillard reaction occurs, creating that perfectly golden crispy crust, while the flesh inside remains flaky and sweet. You pair it with hush puppies and cold drinks. It's a celebration of immediate, local sustenance.
But the guide highlights a very specific, deeply ingrained local attitude regarding another staple of the coast, the shrimp boil. And this introduces the great shrimp debate.
Oh, yeah.
There's a deep, fierce, almost militant local pride in fresh, wild-caught Gulf shrimp and an absolute disdain for imported farm-raised shrimp.
I have to ask you about this because food culture is often driven by nostalgia and bias. Is there really a discernible, objective, biological, or chemical taste difference between a shrimp caught in the Mississippi Sound and a shrimp raised in an aquaculture pond halfway across the world? Or is it just fierce local pride?
It is absolutely a biological, chemical reality. Think back to our very first topic, the estuaries.
The Goldilocks zone.
Right. A wild Mississippi Gulf Coast shrimp has spent its entire life swimming in that dynamic, nutrient-rich collision of the Pascagoula River and the Gulf tides. Its diet consists of a massively diverse range of natural marine organisms, algae, and microscopic proteins.
So if it eats well.
That complex, diverse diet directly translates into the specific amino acid profile and chemical composition of its flesh. It dictates the firm texture, the distinct sweetness, and the snap of the meat.
Terroir, but for the ocean.
Exactly. The culinary term is miroir. A farm-raised shrimp grown in a high-density controlled static pond and fed a monotonous diet of commercial pellets simply does not and chemically cannot develop that same complex flavor profile.
The water makes the flavor.
And when you combine that objective biological superiority with the fact that the person eating the shrimp at the boil might personally know the captain of the boat that dragged the net to catch them, the pride is intensely justified. It is literally the taste of their home waters.
And the guide provides a perfect real-world example of this hyper-local connection. It mentions places like Quality Seafood in Biloxi. This isn't just a restaurant where our food magically appears from a freezer in the back.
No, it's very hands-on.
You walk into a working industrial fish market. You are surrounded by massive bins of crushed ice, guys in white rubber boots, and the heavy smell of the salt marsh. You look at the day's catch, maybe a red snapper that was swimming around a concrete artificial reef 50 miles offshore just that morning.
Right.
You point to it. The fishmonger scales and fillets it right in front of you. Then you physically carry those fresh fillets next door, hand them to the kitchen, and they cook it for you immediately.
That process is the ultimate distillation of the Gulf Coast economy and culture. It connects the offshore vertical ecosystem, the raw horsepower of the commercial fishermen, the local economic market, and the culinary tradition into a single, seamless, tangible experience within a 50-yard radius.
It's all connected.
It highlights a critical truth. Fishing here isn't just a recreational hobby for the weekends. It is the foundational economy. The shrimping fleets, the oyster harvesting, the massive boat-building facilities, and the working waterfronts, they are the literal lifeblood of these communities. They dictate the architecture of the towns, the seasonal flow of industry, and the historical identity of the entire region.
Which brings us to the grand synthesis of everything we've uncovered today. We have journeyed from the microscopic cellular physics of a baby fish fighting osmotic stress in a muddy river, out past the bouncers of the marsh grass, through the passes of the barrier islands, out to the 1,000 horsepower boats hunting monsters in the deep blue desert, and all the way back to a plate of fried fish on a wooden dock.
Quite a journey.
The Mississippi Gulf Coast is a place where a 7-year-old child catching a tiny ground mullet from the surf, a kayaker silently pulling through the needle rush, and a millionaire pushing the throttles forward on a quad-engine offshore boat are all participating in the exact same unbroken living tradition.
They are all tethered to the exact same biological clock. They are reading the exact same lunar tides, respecting the exact same barometric pressure drops, and ultimately relying on the health of the exact same muddy estuary nursery.
They share the same water.
It is a shared, inescapable reality that transcends all social and economic demographics.
And that is the ultimate lifestyle draw of this region. The guide beautifully summarizes why people visit this place for a one-week vacation and somehow, 10 years later, end up moving there permanently for retirement.
It happens all the time.
It's the rhythm. It's the relaxed pace dictated by the tides rather than the clock. It's the tight-knit community built around the marinas and the bait shops. And it's the simple, ubiquitous fact that having a center console boat parked in your suburban driveway is as common and as essential as having a car. It's a place where the water isn't a boundary to the town, it's the center of the town.
It is a culture that fundamentally refuses to be disconnected from its geography.
And that leaves us with a final thought to mull over. We began this deep dive talking about maps. We talked about how that flat, boring blue surface on paper completely hides a chaotic, vibrant, fiercely connected factory of life.
The roof of another world.
We've just spent the last hour exploring how deeply and mechanically interconnected the Mississippi Gulf Coast is, how a drop of rain falling miles inland feeds a river, which balances the salinity of a marsh, which protects a tiny grass shrimp, which feeds a juvenile redfish, which grows large enough to migrate offshore, which eventually feeds a family at a Friday night fish fry under the stars.
Every link matters.
Every single element, no matter how microscopic, bears the weight of the element next to it. So it makes you wonder, as you step out of your door tomorrow morning, as you walk down your own street or drive to work, what hidden, incredibly complex ecosystems are operating right under your feet? What biological factories are churning right outside your own front door that you walk past every single day without ever noticing? The world is never as simple as the flat colors on a map. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, look beneath the surface, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you for listening. I found it fascinating to do the research for this. I ended up doing much more than I fully expected at the beginning. I thought this was just going to be an article about where to fish and what kind of fish. And then I realized that I am actually living in one of those zones where the small little fish live and the grass and the bayou. And that was fascinating to me because I can stand out there on my pier and look at all the little tiny fish and then just wonder, when they get large, they're going to be going out into the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America, as we call it today. And I thought it might be helpful to give you an entire look at how the fish grow to begin with and where they go and how they're harvested, the type of fishing required to catch the different kinds of fish. So I hope you enjoyed listening to this. Please go to RetireCoast.com to read more about it, check out our visuals, and come back to Retire Coast podcast and listen to our next episode. Thank you.